Hello and welcome to our first episode of Conversations Connect or Connect Conversations with Ron and Doug. A while back, Ron and I were talking about the different podcasts that are available to people that are out there on all types of media. And we thought it might be a great idea to put together a podcast and go live and talk about things like reliability, manufacturing excellence, and leadership. And doing so, making this interactive where people can come in and ask questions and we can talk about what's going on in their workplace, whether it's a manufacturing facility, hospital, it doesn't really matter. So welcome. And I hope you all look forward to joining us on a weekly basis or bi-weekly, whichever we put this together. And we'll start out with doing some introductions. And Ron, why don't you tell the audience a little bit about yourself?
Well, I've written several books, Making Common Sense Common Practice. It's now in its 5th edition, so it's been well received. What Tool When, a management guide to try to help folks select the right tool in the appropriate order to be more successful. Another one's Where Do We Start Our Improvement Program? That's a pretty common question. I've tried to answer it in that book. Another one is Business Fables and Foibles, 35 short stories based on well, you might call them screw ups I've seen companies make. That was a fun book to write. And another one is A Common Sense Approach to Defect Elimination. It's it's a common sense approach to it. And defect elimination is a really important issue. And then the last one is Our Transplant Journey, a caregiver story. It's a story about my wife's liver transplant. So those are books that I've written that folks, might have an interest in. I've got a BS, MS, MBA, PE, all that happy stuff. Folks shouldn't be too impressed by all this though, because I'm also a hillbilly. I grew up in Eastern Kentucky, and those guys aren't what the reputation, the stereotype is, and they aren't known for their intellect. So I try to make things simple enough so even I can understand it. So that's probably enough about me.
All right, and I'm Doug Plucknette. I've been around the reliability and maintenance community for about, I've been working on it for 40 years, but out there working as a consultant for just over 20. I started out as a tradesperson, a pipe fitter at Eastman Kodak, went through an apprenticeship program there, then worked as a journeyman and lead person and a supervisor. And as Kodak was downsizing, I made the decision to go back to school. I went to RIT for reliability engineering. And while I was doing my studies at RIT, I developed a RCM program called RCM Blitz. And in 1999, I made the decision to step out and step away from Kodak and start my own business. Lots of people thought I was crazy, and 20 years later, I'm still at it. So
yeah,
I've also written a couple books, reliability centered maintenance using RCM Blitz and clean, green, and reliable that I wrote with Chris Colson a few years back. So
I'd just like to point out though that Doug actually knows how to do the work. All I know is how to talk about the work. So, because he's done it. Yeah.
And I still enjoy the hands-on stuff here at home. I just did an addition on a bathroom a while last summer and early fall. And so I've done some plumbing and carpentry and masonry stuff, hanging tile, and it turned out quite well. My wife was quite pleased with it. And so when I get that chance, I really do enjoy still doing some work with my hands and helping the kids out as well at their place.
Yeah.
So Ron, as we talked about this and we said, gee, we could talk about reliability and manufacturing excellence, could you really give the audience a definition of what you think reliability is? Because that's really one of the questions that comes up most often.
Yeah. I think most folks out there listening know the SMRP, SAE definitions of reliability. It's the probability that a machine or equipment can perform as intended continuously without failure, for a specified period of time under specific operating conditions. Most everybody knows that. The simplest form of reliability I know is that stuff works when you want it to. But I'll give you a little more complex definition, and that's this: is it's the ability of a production system to deliver quality product at the maximum rate, on time, in full, right? On time, in full, at the minimum sustainable unit cost. Production system deliver maximum quality product on time, in full, right? At the lowest sustainable cost. So that kind of broadens the context for what reliability is, and it's more than just equipment. So I think it's really important that we think about not just equipment reliability, but production process capability and reliability, because there are lots of other losses that can occur that aren't related to the equipment, and we need to manage those. So that's a little bit about what it is, or what I think of it as. You may want to add to that, but maybe you want to, just discuss for a minute, what's it worth in a typical company?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think for companies, there's a lot of different answers to this, right? I've worked with some companies that make widgets, right? And so to figure out what reliability is worth, you look at their rate and what they make per hour, and then what their losses are, right? And then say, gee, if we were able to eliminate some of those losses, what's that equate to in product per hour, right? And then what are we selling it for? So it can become pretty extensive. I've had some companies that had saved millions of dollars on just one particular project. And that's the key with this. And when we talk about reliability, is to look at continuous improvement, defect elimination. You talked about that earlier. All right. Now, when we get into other types of systems, let's say compressed air, right? That's a little bit different from measuring that. You've got the more reliable you are, the less leaks you have, right? So you're talking about what is reliability? Well, we have to be able to deliver that compressed air at a specific rate in terms of flow and pressure, and a dew point, so that it's dry and we're not out there putting wet air out to our instruments and impacting the reliability of those. So you have costs associated with less failures in terms of your instruments. You have costs associated with less air leaks, right? If we're out there and we're measuring those, identifying them, eliminating them, right? So that can be a significant amount of money, right? So in terms of what's reliability worth for you, it's really different for every company, but typically it's millions of dollars, right? And can be.
Yeah.
So the other question that comes up along with this is, who really should lead this effort? You and I have been at multiple different places, right? Is it top down, bottom up? Who do you think should lead, Ron?
Well, the short answer is yes. You should be both top down and bottom up. I just wanted to add one point though to what's it worth. I've run some numbers. Let's suppose you've got a $1 billion operation, and your gross profit, say in the range of 20-30%. It's worth roughly, because most folks are underutilized by 5 or 10%. Their maintenance costs are probably 10% or more higher than they should be. And so that translates in a rough calculation to about $30-40 million a year in gross profit. So you're right, it's worth, literally tens of millions of dollars in a large operation. Now you can go break it down into individual areas and components, but the system as a whole, that's about what it's worth. In any event, you asked the question about, who's in charge of it, I guess. I think what I call executive sponsorship is essential. And if you don't have executive sponsorship, you're never going to see it. Or you may see it for a bit, or you may have somebody come in and do a consultant come in and set up a Six Sigma or an RCM or whatever program, and you'll see some improvement, but it's not likely to be sustainable, and you won't inculcate those principles throughout the entire organization. But it also has to be bottom up in the sense that there has to be a process for employee engagement and making sure that they're involved in it, so they have a sense of purpose, a sense of ownership, a sense of control in it. And so you really have to do both. And if you don't, then the risk of it not being sustainable is much, much higher. It's kind of like safety. You know, who owns safety? Well, of course, the executives have the primary responsibility for assuring a safe operation, but it's really everybody's responsibility on site. And if you're not reliable, I've got data, you won't be as safe. You're much greater risk of injury if you don't have a good and reliable operation. So, well, maybe you could get a little bit into, who is responsible,
Well,
who's
looking at responsibility, this is one of those great things. You just brought up safety and said, gee, everybody's responsible for it. And reliability is really the same way. And it's really about educating people of what reliability is and how it impacts all different phases of our business. It impacts manufacturing, it impacts maintenance, it impacts safety, it impacts quality, it impacts shipping, it impacts our customers, right? Every single aspect of our business is impacted by this. So when it comes down to who's responsible, it's getting people to understand how can they impact reliability? What can they do to have an impact or an effect on improving it? What things are they currently doing that might be negatively impacting it? Getting to understand that, how we start up systems, how we do product changes, how we do turnarounds. There's all different types of things we do in our business that impact reliability in positive and negative ways. And getting people to understand that is a big part of it, right? It's also comes down to capabilities. I've recently been working on an article that talks about going back to basics, right? You have to do all the great things that are out there today, the industrial internet of things, smart machines, machine learning, digital twins, all those things are wonderful and they're exciting, right? But if you aren't doing the basics right, if you haven't set the foundation of your reliability program, you're going to struggle with them, right? On top of all that, having that foundation in place, if your people don't have the capabilities to work with precision, if we don't have good procedures in place for them to work by and make sure the work is done consistently, you're going to struggle with this as well. So responsibility comes down to it. It is everybody. It's all parts of our business from shop floor right on up. And when we look at this, people often question, all right, those are all great things. How do we go about doing it? How do we actually get this reliability that you talk about? What do you think about that?
Well, we've mentioned a couple of points already. You've got to have executive sponsorship, and by that I mean, active engagement, much the same as they would around safety. They have to provide the resources, they have to provide the leadership, they have to ask about reliability, they have to measure it. It's about active engagement on the part of leadership. And relative to the shop floor, it's about having structured improvement time where you go restore an asset to like new, and then you set the standards for keeping it that way. And that's, maybe it's once a week for half a day, maybe it's once a month for a full day. It's context dependent. But in between those two, I think there needs to be a good production and maintenance partnership. And on that note, I'm convinced that in a manufacturing plant, reliability should be production led, because most of the losses from ideal production, if you look at OEE, most of those losses don't have anything to do with the equipment. It's mostly about things like product changeovers. It's about raw material quality and quantity. It's about short stops. It's about, derating the process. It's just a plethora of issues that include equipment reliability, of course, but most of them, maintenance does not control. In fact, the equipment issues, maintenance does not control most of those in the plants I've been around. They have to do with design or operation or some other factor. Maybe it's even training. So if you don't have that leadership, that executive sponsorship, active engagement, and if you don't have a good production and maintenance partnership and a good process for engaging the shop floor, you're much less likely to be successful. Something you said earlier prompted me to think about a question or a comment I got in one of the workshops I was doing. One of the guys says, well, we're doing lean manufacturing. And I looked at him and I said, you're not ready. And he said, what do you mean? We're already doing it. And I said, well, I don't care what you're doing, but you're not ready, because their processes were highly unstable, high levels of variation. There are a lot of reactive maintenance, a lot of unplanned downtime. And those things are going to create perturbations in your system such that lean principles get really difficult, really difficult to apply. So, it's those, key elements: sponsorship, production maintenance partnership, and shop floor engagement process. And then kind of related to all that is, what you measure and how you use measures to facilitate some degree of collaboration and cooperation. So maybe you could talk a little bit about, how do we measure? What do we measure? Why do we care?
All right, and this is one of those subjects that I could talk for quite a bit about. Um, Going back to my Kodak days, I was fortunate to picked to be on a corporate team for reliability, and that's when I was still actually working as a lead man in maintenance. And our division was looking for a representative, and my boss happened to say, "Hey, I think Doug would be great for that." So I got put on that team with a guy that was led by a guy named Jerry Haggerty, who I know that you
Yeah,
met
worked with
many
you.
years ago, right? And we got discussing what we ought to do in terms of reliability. And Jerry was pretty adamant that we were all going to start each of the divisions by measuring, right? And that never gets too many people excited. Well, he says, I'd like to know what your reliability really is, and I'm concerned about. There was a guy by the name of Bob Hansen on the team. He was from the Colorado plant, and so he would come in on the phone.
I know Bob well. He's
Yeah,
great.
Bob wrote a great book on OEE and TEEP, right? And OEE is overall equipment effectiveness. TEEP is total effective equipment performance. And I'll talk a bit about each. But Bob said, hey, don't go out there and measure the OEE for your entire plant, because it's almost a meaningless measure when you start including everything. I want you to go out there. We've done criticality analysis as a company about 5 years previous to that. Pick your top 5 critical assets and measure OEE and TEEP on those, and come back and report them at our meeting next month. And then we'll talk about what the losses are, the loss categories, and we'll reach some agreement on those things. So when we're talking as a team, we're talking apples to apples, even though we're in different types of business. One might be making vitamins, another might be making motion picture film, one might be paper products, right? So we had all different business units that were involved there. So OEE was a great measure of understanding where our losses were. And Bob has a little bit different way of measuring it than the traditional Nakajima formula. He puts it into Pareto type look. So it's very easy to understand for managers, supervisors, anybody looking at it, to say, what is the reliability of that particular critical asset, right? So we start with good product manufactured, then we look at quality losses, operational losses, speed losses. And when we look at TEEP, we include or planned losses, things like PMs and vacations and times we're not scheduled to run that machine. So in looking at that, it really all of a sudden came to light. We really had some issues with reliability, right? And we're a company that prided ourselves on trying to be in the forefront of everything. And places, especially motion picture and consumer film, when they started reporting OEEs that were, high 70s, low 80s, and then they heard world class was 85, they were a little upset that they were not world class, right? And so this is one of the learning experience of this, and that's one of the things that I give Jerry and Bob Hansen credit for was giving feedback to the group to say, hey, look, this particular asset is it's a batch process. You're never going to see 85%. It would be highly unlikely. Right now, those other places, utilities, motion picture, where we have machines running and paper that run the same product for a week, 2 weeks, 6 weeks at a time, boy, they ought to be seeing high 90s, right? Above 95%. And boy, when you tell them that and they're seeing numbers of high 70s and low 80s, they're like, oh, wow, maybe we're not so good, right? And then they start getting arguments about, well, we had to run this scrap for this reason, or we had to slow the machine down to get quality. Where do we put the loss? Those measures are extremely important, and they end up actually being a tool themselves, because we can then say, all right, where are our operational losses, right? Is it lack of materials? Is it lack of resources? Is it breakdowns, right? There's a number of different things that fall into that category. Let's Pareto those out. And as you said, all of a sudden it comes to light that, well, we've given maintenance they're in charge of reliability. By measuring OEE, we found out that, wow, in terms of the losses, we're probably responsible for about somewhere between 25 and 30% of the losses at that time in most of the different places. And the larger portion of it was, how do we operate it? How do we start it up? How do we shut it down? How do we know, or why can't we run at the rate we've said we should be able to run at, right? So those measures are extremely important. And once I got a grasp of that, we've been looking at things like MTBF, mean time between failure, right? Great measure for a pump, a motor, particular device, right? When you start looking at something larger, there's just too much involved with it, right? Too much other stuff that's out there. So OEE and TEEP really helped us a lot. TEEP in particular, by the way, we used for how well did they utilize the asset. That came down to, gee, we're a large company and we got, let's say, $80 million of capital to go across a particular site. And who's going to get that capital? Well, all of a sudden, it's some places want capital, and then you start looking at their OEE numbers, and they're, well, you're not even utilizing the equipment that you got. What do you need some for? Right? So it was really the emotional stuff. Well, our stuff is old. Well, old doesn't mean bad, right? So, yeah, when I do RCM, by the way, I always talk about, you really, if you want to do this, pick the assets where you can understand where the losses are. And if they're equipment-based losses, RCM is a great tool for you, right? So these measures are a tool to help you with your continuous improvement program, to help with defect elimination.
Yeah.
So I'm sure you could go on with them as well. Do you have any thoughts on the measures?
Yeah, I had a couple of thoughts on measuring OEE. Number one, and this is a really important point, the objective in measuring OEE is to identify and manage the losses. I want to say that again, manage the losses. Because too many people get hung up on, is it 85 or 95? I don't care.
Yeah.
I don't care if it's 50 or 90. If it's 90 and you've got another 3% in there that you could get if you ran the process effectively, then you're not doing a very good job. On the other hand, if it's 50 and there's 1% in there that you could manage more effectively because of and I've seen that, by the way, in pharmaceutical operations because of GMP requirements, then you're doing a great job. So, and you would think just the opposite. So the focus there is to manage the losses.
Yeah.
And the other comment I'd make is one of the things that I don't see enough of, excuse me, is there aren't enough what I think of as leading measures. The things that the shop floor does
Yeah.
to make sure that the lagging measures, the OEE thing, can come out right. So you've got to have some lagging or leading measures that the shop floor gets involved in identifying and measuring and improving if you're really going to have a proper measurement system. I wouldn't, a couple other comments, I wouldn't have more than 4 or 5 for a given process or area. I've been in plants where they'll have 25 or 30 measures scattered on a wall somewhere, and you go, okay, is this good or not? And nobody knows. And it might be dated, July of 2019. Well, it must not be important either. So keeping them current, keeping them limited to your span of control, and having some leading indicators to go along with your lagging indicators, I think are really, really important approaches to having a measurement system that's effective.
One last thing for me in terms of OEE is the mature organizations that I've worked for actually understand and grew to understand that when they were measuring OEE and they understood what their losses are and they started working on those things, and then all of a sudden their OEE starts going up and then they peak, right? The first thing they did was, well, we're going to set a goal this year, improving it by X. And I'd say to them, no, just say you're going to improve or you're going to eliminate losses, right? Because the end result is, and as I say, the mature organizations come to this understanding and start using it. Now, when we get a good sustained OEE, regardless of what that number is, I can actually plan production, right? I can actually plan what we can make and deliver to our customers consistently and reliably, right? So that's one of the important pieces of that measure that lots of companies miss out on, right? Because they just put it, as you said very early in this discussion, this isn't something that should be led by maintenance. This is something that should be led by operations.
Yeah. Well, and just another comment, there's some folks out there maybe in utilities or maybe they're in some sort of infrastructure area.
Yeah.
And so OEE, doesn't, make much sense to them, right? So a couple of comments on power generation, utilities, that sort of thing. The thing you want to worry about, at least in my view, is equivalent forced outage rate. What's ideal? The key question here for OEE even is what's ideal? How close are we? Where are the gaps?
Yep.
And how do we manage those gaps? So if you're not in a production industry, say you're in power, then equivalent forced outage rate, ideally it'd be 0. So where are you? If you're at 5%, that's millions of dollars. So how are you going to manage that gap to move towards 0? And you may only get to 1%. So, and another one in fossil units is what's your heat rate, your thermal efficiency? What's ideal? Well, maybe it's 42%. Where are you? What's 37%? Well, that 5% again is millions of dollars. Maybe you're in a smelting operation. What's ideal current efficiency? Maybe it's 95%. Where are you? I'm at 91. Well, that's millions more. So, what you want to do is identify the ideal state in whatever industry you're in. Even if it's on a subway, the ideal state would be 0 delays. Well, how many delays are you having? The ideal state might be, so many people miles, so just define the ideal state and then measure against that and then manage the losses. Manage the losses. If you say it 21 times, it'll stick.
Sometimes it has to be more than that.
Yeah, maybe.
The other question that comes up quite a bit because, man, there is just so much out there. Um, how long is this going to take us? Right. That's one of the first questions I get when I come in and start working with a company is, man, we feel like we're so far behind, and we looking at all this stuff. How long is it going to take? What's your answer when somebody asks you that question?
Well, the short answer is years. You know, the long answer is forever. So uh, now I have seen. Wait till Doug gets his phone off there.
Yeah, no kidding.
So
That's the danger of the cancellation that came earlier.
right,
All
I
right,
know.
let's go back and I'll ask that question again. All
Well,
right, since
that's
we
okay. Uh, uh, so you know, I've seen dramatic improvement in a matter of sometimes days or months, but in order to effectively put the processes in place, institutionalize, the processes, if you will, it typically takes, several years, depending on where you are and where you're trying to go. And I wouldn't expect, I mean, I've seen a particular production line in one day just
yeah.
dramatically improve throughput. But was it institutionalized? It took several months or about a year to actually get it locked down in place with procedures, standards, checklists, people trained, and so on. But generally, it's going to take several years to inculcate these principles into a given organization. And really, reliability isn't something you do and it's done. It's kind of like safety. It's something you're going to do forever, and you're always working on getting it better. So in that sense, it's an ongoing process where you're always looking for better ways to do things. So you make a little more money, you invest that back in the business for, better products and better processes and more capital improvements and all that sort of thing. So I would say notionally, though, in most organizations I've seen, you're talking 3, 5 years, and I've seen it sometimes take longer for various and sundry reasons. And I've seen short-term improvements occur very quickly, but they weren't quite sustainable at that juncture. So that would be, you may want to add to that.
That's always been the struggle with what I do with going and helping companies with RCM. Right, is uh, we go out, we do it, we get it done, we get it implemented, we start doing the things. They see the improvement. They get excited about it. They might even do a presentation at a conference, and then you go back to do something else. Or you bump into somebody a couple years later, and you ask them how it's going, and they put their hands up and they go, yeah, we had a management change, and now we're talking about doing something else, and they're not giving us time to do this or that, and
Yeah.
we've kind of fallen back, and that was something that you and I have known each other a number of years, and I can't remember which of the books that of yours that I read that all of a sudden a light come on for me where you talked about, if you want to sustain this stuff, when you have a management change, there's got to be some things that you talk about during that change when the new person comes in. Hey, here's the things we're doing good. We hadn't ought to be changing those. Let's make sure we continue that. And anything else is wide open for you to come in and dabble with and help us improve, right?
Yeah. Well, just another comment on that, and that's this. You wouldn't do that for safety, would you?
No.
I mean, you wouldn't just go, well, we got that done, and then walk away from it and let it, go to hell. So why would you do it for reliability? Lock it down,
Exactly.
institutionalize it, make it stick. And part of the way you do that is you get lots and lots of people involved in making little bitty improvements day to day, which is why you need that structured improvement time and that defect elimination thing. Get 1,000 folks, doing one little thing right, and that'll probably stick. Have one guy leading a team of 3 or 5, you'll get some improvement on one area, one machine, and it probably not going to stick. You know, so it has to do with, you know, inculcating that. Another just comment, not related to what we're just talking about, but back to the OEE thing. OEE, another way of thinking about that, it's a measure of your capital equipment effectiveness. You know, don't spend more money on capital if you don't need to. And so, you know, you at the very highest level, you could think of OEE as a measure of your, you know, asset or capital, how well you're using your capital. At the lowest level, it's a measure on the particular specific actions you need to take in concert with the shop floor and what you're going to do to address that issue. So if it's effectively used, it can be quite a powerful tool. If it's not, it's something you report back to Galactic headquarters and nobody gives a damn. And it's not very effective. So you've wasted your money and your time. So that's, you know, now just one other comment, Doug, you know, we're going to be going into a lot of the detail on all of this, you know, on design practices, operating practices, purchasing in stores, maintenance, you know, condition monitoring, the tools, RCM, TPM, you know,
Root cause
PD,
analysis.
yeah, root cause, you know, all that stuff, Kaizen, you know, 5S and so on. We're going to be, you know, talking about all those things. But if folks have particular questions or topics they'd like us to discuss, you know, we're quite open to that.
And that's the fun of doing this live, is we're not going to know what's going to come up each week.
Right.
So we really do challenge the audience to say, and I know we're not going to be able to answer all those questions. You know, there's going to be, you know, we'll get to what we can each week, and some of those that linger, we'll view them over and make them topics, or make sure we try to answer them in following sessions. And so hopefully we can get a regular group of people that tune in here with us, and make this as informative and educational as possible.
Yeah.
I think that
if we don't know, we probably know somebody who does.
that's
So
right.
we'll
And that could
try
be
to,
more fun. We talked about, maybe we'll have some special guests down the road, especially if we get some of those questions where somebody starts asking about what all is involved with vibration analysis, and what do those measures mean. And when I look at that chart, right, that's all stuff that, well, I know where it's applied and maybe how often you ought to do it. But when it comes down to, is Doug a level 3 guy? Heck no, right? So if we need those type of answers, we'll find those people.
yeah. Or it could be some at a higher level, you know, how do you calculate return on investment or return on capital or return on shareholder equity or whatever, you know?
Yeah.
Most of those I feel reasonably comfortable. It might take me a minute to think about it to give a proper answer, but we're just open to any and all, you know, questions or comments or suggestions that people may have, you know?
Yeah. Who's
So,
got a great capital improvement project going on, right? Or process that they're using that is above and beyond some of the things we've seen out there. So as we look at this, I can't remember. We had a full page of different topics we're going to discuss down the road.
yeah.
And, I'm excited to get at those, and I'm really happy that we've finally kicked this off. It's something you and I talked about for a little while, and thankfully the folks at MOBIUS have made this happen.
Yeah, a couple of that we didn't mention was, well, we sort of implied managing cultural change, aligning the organization, more on performance measures, a little more on planning and scheduling might be in there, a little more on, you know, proactive things. Training is always a big issue.
Yeah.
You know, if you don't train people properly, or managing an aging or retiring workforce. Doug and I would know about that. Although, you know, we keep kicking around and, you know, trying to stay connected, if you want to use that word. So we'll be covering lots and lots of different topics. And as we said, just encourage you guys to come back to us with questions or suggestions that you may have that would benefit you, because this whole process is really for you. We're trying to share some things that might benefit you and how you do what you do and that sort of thing. So we're quite open to that, and thank you for attending.
So for our audience, we will be here every Tuesday afternoon on YouTube at 2 p.m. So if you can put that in your calendars and set it aside, because we do want this to be an open forum where people come in and listen and join us and ask questions, and that we can help with down the road. All right.
Yep. So we're going to wrap it up here.
We are going to wrap it up for this week.
Okay.
It's been
All
my
right.
pleasure, Ron.
Yeah, likewise. And thank you to everybody out there. We really appreciate you joining us, and I hope you'll tune in to the next episode of this Connect Conversations with Doug and Ron.
All right.